It's Sunday night, July 10th, 2016. This is Warren Sprouse, and we're here together on the Bible Forum. The music always gets me because I think it's going to be just one cycle. It's really two, and that second cycle's a little bit much. And I'm ready to go, and there we are. But we're ready to go here. We're going to be spending the next 2 hours together. Some of the buzzards are starting to collect. I can see them starting to arrive on my screen, and sooner or later there'll be some folks in the chat room. You need to jump in there if that's something you're interested in doing. Get in the chat room and talk to these folks. There's stuff that goes on back and forth. It can be interesting. We have our phone up and running, 843-732-0249 if you'd like to make a phone call. Get in on the discussion. Got a lot of stuff going on. You got the email. I'm sure you did. It looks like this. Whoop, a little crooked. That's me pointing my bony finger at you. And I do that for a reason. I do that because that's preaching. That's propositional truth. That's proposing a response. And so I talk to you like that. On yours, it'll be on the bottom on the page, printed. It's on the other side. But there are pictures that go along with the things we're going to be talking about. High on our list, of course, is the Dallas sniper and Hillary and the kinds of things that went on this week with her. The government's involvement in our churches, which is starting to ramp up, the president's response to all this. We're going to be talking about a lot of those kinds of things. I hope that you really tap in every once in a while to the blogs. I wrote several blogs this week. I don't often write, or at least here in the last month, I haven't written very much. It's been a very busy time for me. I haven't had a lot of time to write. But this is a blog I wrote on practicing Christianity in America is now a crime. Here's the one I wrote on the Dallas snipers, and another one having to do with the government's involvement in our churches. And this comes from Des Moines, Iowa. The government, not federal government, but local government has gotten involved in a church situation there. We'll talk about all of that before the night is out. Do want to talk about the Bible Institute. If you have not signed up, you need to do that. That is the Bible Institute of Charleston.org, and you can go to their website, click on that, and it'll tell you everything you want to know, show you pictures, you got video, you can get some idea what's going on. You can reach it from our website, thebibleforum.net. Just click the link that you see there. I guess it's on the bottom right-hand side, just above or just below the video screen that you're watching. There's others there, livinggodly.net, tribiblicalcounseling.net. I think they're The View from Zoar. At least one of these, maybe two of these, are actually from blogs or from The View from Zoar. We had some events this week having to do with police departments, at least 3 or 4. We have an execution by cop, or maybe it was a justifiable action. We'll take a look at that a little bit later on. On the other side, there is this idea that these events as they take place are really a product of our now well up and running secular society. Hillary Clinton got exonerated this week by the FBI, or did she? We'll talk about that a little bit. There's government oversight in our churches. That's the blog I was talking to you about. And a book has come out, and don't know if it just came out. The author has passed away, so it may have been a book that was out a little bit earlier, but it's entitled Mega Shift. And if you've been with me for the last 10 years, we've been doing this for 17, but if you've been with me for at least the last 10, you might have remembered. There was a time when I was on the radio in Wilmington, I talked about this on my show. I actually talked about it on a weekday show there at the radio station about the shift. And I remember the host of that talk program just staring at me with eyes that were glazed over and asking questions he didn't understand. And I didn't fully understand at that time, but the shift took hold. And now we're into mega shift, and we'll talk about that. Our president has been talking about, off and on periodically, about a global police force, and as a result of Dallas, he re-upped on some of that conversation. We'll take a look at that. The Roman Catholic Church is in the news a little bit this week. We'll take a peek at what that's all about. I think the mayor of Philadelphia, and I believe he's a Catholic, has no idea what the Catholic Church teaches, took exception to something they said. It just gets funnier. But it helps us understand a little bit about the Catholic doctrine. Got a fellow out there that has applied for a marriage license to marry his laptop. Yeah, that's a computer. We've got a legacy issue that our president has announced as he is winding down his 8 years in office. Each time this happens, presidents want to be known for one particular thing. He's chosen a legacy issue. We'll talk about that somewhere along the line. Some of the Christian dating websites are under attack. They're being pushed now to offer same-sex matches. If you're going to go out there and put yourself on the web and in the business world, commercial environment, you're but you're advertising to the whole world to be involved. You have to be fair, and so we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about the Donald. Some conservative evangelical pastors are really concerned about what to do. Not sure they're going to vote at all. They definitely, a sizable percentage at least, are saying that while they have in the past run voter registration things and information packets and other kinds of things to help people stay involved so they can vote they're not going to do that. And so we're going to look at why and what and how all that works and so forth. But there's a lot of other stuff that has popped up this week that we will probably touch on before the night is out. I've chosen some of the ones that I think are the most important or the most significant to talk about. One of those is this idea of a global police force. We've talked about and heard about this ever since I was a young fella. But on June 26th of this year, just last month, a few weeks ago, a newspaper or a magazine published a series of photos that showed what are called MRAP armored vehicles, all decked out with United Nations markings, being carried on the backs of trailers and trucks down Interstate 81 in Virginia. You might have seen the article. I think we talked about it just in passing because nobody quite knew what that was all about. Turns out that these vehicles were purchased from American companies. They had been manufactured in York, Pennsylvania, and they were headed overseas to be used by the United Nations in various conflict areas. And so everybody took a collective sigh of relief, a giant step back, and, okay, everything's okay. Not quite. Turns out on the other side, there is no question that the United Nations is expanding its police powers, or that Americans are footing the bill for it, pretty much all of it. Over the last 16 years, there's been an increase from 2,000 to 13,000 UN police officers, and there are plans for more. Now, these troops are being deployed in conflict zones around the world on what are called peace missions. Of course, the goal here is to fill a power vacuum, but we know there's no power vacuum over here in these United States. In fact, it's just the opposite. In May of last year, 2015, the trend of providing military equipment to domestic law enforcement had become so strong, so prevalent, so much of it, that the president issued an executive order to seize back some of the tanks provided free of charge to local law enforcement agencies. You might have noticed in the last 10 years how local police departments are looking more military with every passing day. Part of that is equipment we made for battles overseas we're not doing anymore, and we've got all this surplus, and it's being given to departments free of charge if they will use it. Last May, the government started saying we want some of this back. The military equipment taken together with a push for nationalizing or internationalizing American police procedures have begun to transform what used to be a local community-based organization into a form of control being foisted upon us by what can only be referred to as globalists. We talked about it last week. You heard about it ad nauseum, about our former President Bill Clinton meeting with the Attorney General in Phoenix, Arizona, a week or so back. And we wondered, what in the world was he doing there? Well, the real question is, what was she doing there? Well, it turns out the Attorney General was there to explain the future policing policies in larger cities. You see, the federal government is systematically transforming local police agencies into federal agencies. They're doing this by ordering new federal guidelines. Want to make these people more efficient, more effective. And so the federal government is stepping up to the major cities, the police departments around the country, the bigger ones, and changing the way they do business. It is being characterized as taking officers off the street because there's more paperwork, more restrictions, and more social work. They have a name for it. It's called the Strong Cities Network. The Strong Cities Network is an agreement governed by a law enforcement group whose laws and procedures will be applied in cities around the world, including at first some of our own cities, such as New York and Atlanta and Denver and Minneapolis and apparently Phoenix. Attorney General Lynch referred to establishing a global community in her statement unveiling this new program. In a 2012 speech to the UN General Assembly, our president declared, quote, "The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. Opposition to Sharia law and uncontrolled immigration are but two of the many global elements to this new law enforcement initiative. Ultimately, an international council could conceivably be the one deciding that patriotism and liberty are extreme values." This week, as a result of what happened in Dallas, our president, who was in Poland, spoke to us, the American people, talked about harnessing the increased attacks on police, the periodic shooting of people by stressed out cops, and began again to push his agenda for federalizing state and local police forces. He said, "I want to start moving on constructive actions that are actually going to make a difference." Those actions, he said, would be based on recommendations of the panel that he picked after the 2014 street riots in Ferguson, Missouri. The panel offered practical, concrete solutions that can reduce, if not eliminate, the problems of racial bias. The dramatic shootings are an opportunity to push that agenda, Obama said. "If my voice has been true and positive, my hope would be that the panel surfaces problems frames them and allows us to wrestle with these issues and try to come up with practical solutions. He began touting the panel's recommendations in March of last year, and something called the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. It was a report that was published last year. So the issue is not if, but when. There was a tweet this week by Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney, and I think that he's probably a Catholic. I can't say that for certain, but Kenney sounds Irish. It's Philadelphia. Very seldom is there any political types in Philly that aren't Catholic. But he was responding to Philadelphia Archbishop's guidelines that he issued on marriage. And it urged all pastors and all Catholics to, quote, strike a balance between teaching the truths of criticism of the permanence of marriage and the dignity of human sexuality with a merciful approach to people in broken marriages or with same-sex attraction. The Archbishop said Jesus gave us gifts of Holy Communion because he so loved us, all of us, and that the actions of some of these people against the Catholic position are just not Christian. Did you hear that? Jesus gave us the gift of Holy Communion because he loved us, all of us, even lesbians and so forth. Is that what you understand is the gospel? Recently it was said by a member of the Roman Catholic clergy that a Roman Catholic divorced from their first wife or husband is still married in the eyes of church law. The fact that this is considered to be news is a sad reminder that the Roman Catholic Church's teachings are largely unknown and greatly misunderstood by Catholics as well as the rest of us. You see, Catholics consider marriage to be a sacrament. A sacrament is something that mediates the grace of God to you. Sacraments cannot just be undone. The Church does not recognize civil divorce as the end of a marriage, but rather as part of an annulment process. This process decides whether or not a marriage was ever valid to begin with. A person who is civilly divorced is still considered to be married within the Catholic Church, and thus would be committing the sin of adultery if they were to marry or have sexual relations with anyone else outside of that original marriage. A person who's not in a state of grace cannot receive communion. A person who is not able to receive communion is in danger of dying outside of grace, which means you risk hell if you die in that state. Simply living with someone as brother and sister without actually consummating the relationship would not be considered sinful and thus would be the workaround for divorced couples so they might still receive communion. If they cannot receive communion, they risk their very soul. These are the issues that apparently the Philadelphia mayor doesn't grasp. But these are not new. These concepts are all almost 2,000 years old. There are some Christian dating websites out there. You've seen them advertised on TV. Some of the more popular ones have run afoul of the social standards that we now have in this country, and they have been required to open up for same-sex matches. One of the most prominent was started by a Christian psychologist. It's probably the oldest one that you know of. And they were taken to court. They finally agreed, rather than go through the expensive process, to start a website, a dating website that was just for the lesbian, the gay, the bisexual, and whatever. Now, what you probably have not paid too much attention to, you don't notice, they don't advertise it. They're still advertising the first one. They're not really advertising the second one. And I guess they don't have to, but they do have it available. Now another one has popped up, something called ChristianMingle.com. ChristianMingle.com must now allow gay and lesbian users to search for same-sex matches as a result of a discrimination lawsuit filed by two gay men. The California judge who approved the settlement of discrimination claims has also ordered Spark Networks Incorporated, which owns Christian Mingle, along with several other dating websites, to pay the two plaintiffs $468,000. Does any of that sound like capitalism? Does any of that sound like free speech? Does that sound like any other guaranteed right and or American principle? Everything's up for grabs. Me, I'd simply block my website from California servers if that's possible. I'd quote passages from Romans chapter 1, where Paul, writing under the inspiration of the Spirit of God, tells us that what God does to a society, what God does to individuals that reject Him, He turns them over to their own sinful devices. And there is a sequence. It gets ever worse and ever worse and ever worse. At the end of it all, God judges them by allowing for homosexuality. And that means that they, quote, have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. Romans chapter 1, verse 29. But it is rapidly becoming, in this country, where you can't say stuff like that. You can't come right out and say that homosexuality is the judgment of God upon a person, because people don't understand what you're talking about, that God somehow zaps them with this homosexual gene. No. He just does not restrain them from doing it. It is a natural, human, sinful, disgusting behavior. And God restrains sin. But if you push Him, He'll relax that restraint. That's the way this thing works. Which leads me to this whole discussion of marrying your laptop. You remember the lady in Kentucky that ran afoul of the law, went to jail because she wouldn't give same-sex couples a license? Well, this fellow went to her. He tried this in Florida, I guess, but he went to this person, this Kim Davis, this lady in Kentucky. The guy's name is Chris Sevier. And according to Liberty Counsel, he has filed lawsuits against anybody he can find, I suppose, in this regard. The Vanderbilt Law School graduate is trying to prove to the embattled clerk that marriage between same-sex couples bears the same legitimacy as a marriage between humans and inanimate objects. And it's important to note that Sevier's law license was revoked in 2011. As it turns out, this Vanderbilt Law School graduate has just been doing this in Florida and in Texas. He's suing the governor. He sued the attorney general, county clerks, anybody. The Florida case was thrown out, noting that Sevier is against gay marriage and wanted to make the point that if gay couples have the right to marry their object of sexual desire, even if they lack corresponding sexual parts, then he says I should have the right to marry my preferred sexual object. You starting to get it? Sevier is determined to prove that marriage between a man and a woman can justify any sort of marriage, including a union between a man and a machine. He's trying to prove that the landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision legalizing gay marriage allows people to marry whomever or whatever they are attracted to. And the odds are, ultimately, he'll probably win. Maybe not he, but somebody. This week we read an article about a mother. We call her a mother because she gave birth to a child. But she ran afoul of the news and the police when they found that she was swinging her 5-month-old son like a baseball bat. This happened in Florida. She was in an argument with her boyfriend. Doesn't say he was the father of the child. But she struck the boyfriend with the infant. before dropping the child face first into the sand on Daytona Beach. Cops allege that Tatiana Allen, who's 18 years of age, initially hit her 19-year-old boyfriend several times in the face with a closed hand before using her baby as a weapon. Allen, witnesses said, swung the infant like a bat before the baby was dropped in that sand face down. The boyfriend, says it is the child's father, quickly flipped the infant upright since the child was unable to turn over on his own. Witnesses told cops that Allen subsequently snatched her son from the man's arm and walked away with the child dangling without his head being supported properly. Are you shocked? If you allow mothers to kill their babies to preserve their own lifestyle, to make them happier, or just because they don't want one, what makes you so surprised when they show this kind of disrespect for that same child after the child is born? I know. I say stuff like that and people say, well, you're just exaggerating. Ask Tatiana. Our government has issued sanctions against North Korean dictator, and I say big deal. Just this past week, Kim Jong-un ran afoul of our own government. Oh, now we've issued sanctions against North Korean government in the past, but this is against him and other top officials. And they're doing this because of the human rights abuses in North Korea. And this makes news. I don't think it's news. I don't think he cares. But the sanctions are about any money changing hands in this country that has anything to do with his personal property. They're just aggravating him. I think it was this week they had a submarine that shot a missile off. They're getting into this pretty good. But I don't think that anybody in the military community is the least bit concerned about North Korea. The World Peace Organization has spoken, and it doesn't look good for Israel. On Friday, June 3rd, the French hosted a meeting of almost 30 foreign ministers, including Secretary of State John Kerry, to seek international consensus on a way to move talks relative to the Palestinian peace process, how to move them forward. The expectation is that Israel would withdraw from all lands that it had captured during the 1967 war. That includes East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights. This land for peace exchange serves as the foundation of the Arab League's peace plan, which was launched in 2002. Anybody want to bet money on this? Israel is not involved in these talks, but you and I both know they're not giving up the land they got in 1967. These Arab nations attacked Israel, and she beat them, and she took their property. That's what war has been as long as there's been war on the planet. We have land in this country we took the same way. Why all of a sudden is Israel to be treated differently? But it's being suggested that the allure of peace with the entire Arab world may just be the thing that would tempt Israel to cross those red lines that it has vowed never to cross. In the trade, that's called journalistic dreaming, because it's not going to happen.